But let's talk about Jonathan Chait, as long as we're talking about privilege. Jonathan Chait wrote a piece in New York Magazine, this past week, about the PC police of the new left. And it has got quite a bit of attention. And, let me just try and state the premise of the piece, which is that there is a movement on the left that he perceives that is anti-democratic and is crowding out voices where PC-ness has become overwhelming and very problematic on the left. From college campuses, people being not allowed to speak at college campuses, one incident of violence that he cites, and then some mean hashtags or something that he cites, literally. And he's complaining about it. And it's interesting because there's been a lot of this going on for an extended period of time where people have talked about it. There's been better written, I think, pieces on this dynamic. This is a guy who also wrote a very similar piece in 2007 about the blogosphere.
Blogofascism. I think Digby covered this pretty well.
Yes. But, so this is about this sort of PC, there's a new sort of PC police out there, I guess, that we see in the context of, Colbert at one point, in terms of the comedy world, but also Jonathan Chait cited some feminist email lists where people get very upset about privilege and whatnot. Give me your perspective on this. I mean, have I articulated this?
I think pretty well. I mean, maybe my response will help. I don't know. I certainly do my best. I think that I don't know if nuance is the word here, but I think some of us who are responding to this and what Jonathan Chait is saying, we're talking about, in a manner speaking, two different things. I think Digby had a great response, and you brought up what he wrote in 2007. Jonathan Chait has always been a New Republic Democrat, right? It's like being a new Democrat. He's always been a Democrat. I remember one piece where he wrote at one point that Digby didn't even include about how he had a visceral hatred for Howard Dean. I remember that being a big piece that got him on Crossfire. He's played this role for years. He's done this gig. You can find, Jacob Weisberg does this stuff. Will Salden does this stuff, and there's a few that aren't really even progressive anymore that used to. Mickey Kaus, who's a complete imbecile, but that's for another show. The lefties, Michael Kinsley, a lot of them went through the New Republic. It created a lot of these types. So when he sits there and whines and he talks about Joe Klein, well, the truth of the matter is, in that piece, the truth is that we know for years that blogs were needed because if the mainstream media were doing its duty, if they were actually acting responsibly instead of he said, she said, you say vanilla, I say chocolate, they're both valid, they're both realistic responses when something has to be one or the other. We don't, the impeachment of Clinton, as she mentioned, the stolen election in Florida, the ignoring 9/11 and the fact that these guys had so many warnings and allowing them to sweep under the carpet, and then the Iraq War. All right, that's what the blogosphere rose up in response to, and it wasn't just Cheeto eating whoever in their basement. It was a lot of very smart, very well educated people who were sitting there saying, "I can't believe what's going on here." I remember Josh Marshall started talking points. During the recount in Florida, for example, it was a response to that. So it was enormously necessary to have voices that would reach and affect mainstream media, that were voices that were based in reality and not where's my next paycheck coming from, and what do I need to do to fit into the in crowd and get invited to that cocktail party, the village, as Digby called it. And I think that was hugely helpful. So Jonathan Chait being the guy to write this is a joke. He's always just, attacked the left constantly and then almost seemingly is shocked when they attack back and point out how wrong he is about everything. Where I differ with some of the responses is I do think that there is a real problem in parts of the left with political correctness. There have been huge, fights between the transgender community and the pro-choice community, for example, on how you refer to women. That with nastiness coming out and some vicious things being said. There have been people, somebody wrote a great piece and I erased it by mistake or whatever, talking about people showing up to progressive rallies, and he was talking about one who's a Hispanic man who was 33 who'd been in the Iraq War from a rural town and just happened to say something about, different genders having innate differences. And instead of saying, well, maybe this guy hasn't studied about this or learned about that, just reaming him to the point where he ran away and never came back. And there are people with progressive impulses, but they don't know the language yet. They don't know what's going on the inside. And there are those that literally shut the gates. And I'm speaking from personal experience because, I don't know what feminist listservs he's talking about, but I'm on just a whole variety of regular listservs. And I've seen this. I've seen where people who are progressive will criticize somebody, African American, for example, because they're towing the moderate line on charter schools and selling out their own community. And I saw these two one progressive man and one progressive woman, both of whom were white, get insulted and called racist because they didn't have the right to criticize somebody who was African American. Literally, that's what it said. That's a serious problem. And so I don't worry about, with the magazines and all this sort of stuff. But some of this stuff, if you say trigger alert, conversation shut down. If you say microaggression, conversation shut down. I've got a problem with that. I'll be honest. I think we all need to sit there and we need to actually be open about how we feel. To me, the whole thing about, what Jews always said about the Holocaust is you never forget. If you forget and you don't talk about it, it happens again. I would rather know how people feel. I don't want them to not say things because society will sanction them. I want them to not say things because they think it's wrong. And if they don't think it's wrong, I would hope they would say it. And so I know that's I'm biting off a big chunk here. But what I'm saying is I don't see it exactly the same way as Digby. If he complains or people from that sort of centrist-y media, I couldn't care less what they say. It's more when I see progressives with good intentions being attacked by other progressives who have put up almost a sort of authoritarian line that if you use the wrong word or say the wrong thing, even if you haven't been around to experience or learn about how we're now talking about something in a different way, you're banished. And again, I've seen it on. It's not like I'm not talking from. Oh, I read that somewhere. I've seen this before my eyes on listservs, and I think it could become a bad thing. So there you go.
I mean, I think I am not as sensitive to that. I mean, I think my feeling is there are jerks everywhere, and there are people who don't really, who are not conscious of other people's feelings, and this goes back and forth. And I think also it has to do with, and I think Atrios had written something like this over the past day or two. From my perspective, I have a very big platform, relatively speaking, to the average person. I've been able to go on MSNBC literally hundreds of times for years, and the Majority Report is a fairly sizable platform, and so
come on, don't discount this.
Right. Well, no, I mean, reaching, but tens of thousands, and it's not. I mean, that's not nothing, and in the context of our numbers probably rival Al Jazeera's at this point. But that said, but on the radio, that's sort of shocking to me in some way. But when on the radio, we were talking to millions, and so on some level, my feeling is that part of having that platform is an ability, an increased ability to absorb some of these attacks. And when you talk about, a guy who comes in and he's maybe ignorant about, being sensitive to certain things, he shouldn't be attacked, but it is worthwhile, in my opinion, to vigorously say, hey, this is what you're saying is offensive to me because of X, Y, or Z. And I don't
You're
know
right. I think it's how you say it.
And it's how you say it, I think, in those contexts. And I think, I think the more interesting thing to me is that, particularly in this age of Twitter, the bars to entry in terms of having a voice in this larger discourse is much lower even than it was for a blog. It took a while. If you were a blogger, it wasn't like you could just set up a blog and then people would pay attention to you. You had to have an extended period of time where you would basically, in some fashion or another, based on merit, based on a combination of merit and social skills maybe, you would you would basically get into the conversation. On Twitter, there's still that. You can't just set up a Twitter account and people are going to follow you or retweet you or you're going to have any influence. Over time, people judge you. They like whatever you have to say or they don't or whatnot, and they repeat. My point being that we're going through another phase of, on some level, of the democratization of discourse. And that is always going to be offensive to people who have benefited from the lack of the democratization of discourse.
Well, you're right. So people like Schecter, that's what I'm saying, they're not my concern. And frankly, you're not my concern, and I'm not my concern because, you've, through this show and the Daily and MSNBC, I don't go on MSNBC as much as you, but a decent amount, and the Daily Beast and some other things,
right.
CNN that I've done. So people can criticize me all they want. I'm more concerned about the activists that don't have this platform, that are coming places and just aren't sort of attuned, and so that they're invited with open arms and said, this is not how we talk about this. This is offensive to me, and here's why, as opposed to get the hell out of here. And I can tell you, on some listservs, I've seen some get the hell out of here. I've seen some, your whiteness is blinding me and things of that sort that I just don't think are helpful.
Well, I mean,
and you may be right. It may just be individual assholes. I don't know.
But it also, let me just also say that, this is just sort of a natural, this is sort of a natural occurrence. It's, people, the expectation necessarily that people who have been who have been subjected to this type of oppression, or you want to call them microaggressions, or who have been subjected to this type of just being an afterthought in the context of society, they're going to be mad. And they have a lot of reason to. And sometimes I think it's more, it is a lot to expect that these people are going to have the emotional maturity to handle the fact that they have been crapped on for an extended period of time and have had to not be able to accept who they are. They've got a process to go through too. So, I feel like this is a stage, a phase that we're going to have to go through, and it's going to be messy at times. And I think to say hey, that person treated me poorly, and I just didn't know is, I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. To write an intellectual treatise, ostensibly an intellectual treatise, that this is somehow an attack on some type of institutions, I think is really problematic.
All Schecter did for me is open the door to having a real discussion. Schecter is not part of that discussion. To me, I think people on the actual left, with each other at conventions, whether it's Roots Camp or Netroots Nation or whatever else it is, need to have these conversations, because I think a lot of people who are progressive out there that aren't the sort of small group of people, and it is small when you compare it to overall out there, who are involved in online politics, whether they're liberal white, whether they're African American, whether they're Hispanic, are not attuned to all of this, right? They're just not. And I think that we risk, and I've seen it happen, alienating people by saying, well, you didn't say the right word there, you offended me, as opposed to, look, you made a mistake, this can be taken offensively. It's how you do it. And I've seen it done poorly in a few places to the point where it really bothers me. So again, all Schecter does is open the door for a conversation. What Jonathan Schecter gets offended by, I couldn't care less. This is a guy who supported the Iraq War and said he hated Howard Dean and God knows how many other stupid things he said. And as Digby pointed out, he and Joe Klein and a bunch of these people were just upset because their voices didn't reign supreme anymore. There are people who started their own blogs who suddenly were getting more traffic than them. So there's a lot of that tied up in that. With me, none of it's tied up in that, except for not wanting to alienate potential people that can be on our side who truly are progressive, not Jonathan Schecter.
Right. And I think that's a skill set of that is not necessarily tied into this, right? That's a skill set that says, how do you manage people? How do you build allies that may or may not, it's an emotional maturity that may or may not come out as in, I don't like the language you use, but it also could be hey, you're not. It could be perpetrated by a white person as much as a person of color, or it could be perpetrated by a cisgendered person as it could be someone who is not. I mean, so that is, I don't know. I mean, I think people should just sort of. There's
Do
some
I think
people
it's the
who
end
are
of the world? No, I don't think an apocalypse is coming. I don't think this is nearly as important as about 10,000
except for
other
those
things.
eco guys who those enviros who are like the world is coming to an end. Like they're no.
Well,
okay, we're not
they
being
have the right to their opinion,
Not being facetious.
as Jim Inhofe has the right to his
Right,
opinion.
exactly.
I mean, it'll be interesting when his house just suddenly lights on fire because it's so dry in Oklahoma. But that'll be something he'll have to deal with.